Welcome to Roles and Permissions, Part 2 of 3. I'm Simeon White, a senior consultant at Stoneridge Software and a Microsoft certified trainer. Today we're going to start talking about permissions in Business Central, our second part of this series. So let's go ahead and dive right into the application. Right, so here we are looking at Business Central. So where we left off last, we were talking about roles. Now I want everyone to keep in mind, well, roles are connected to permission sets in a way how you actually use them. They are not anything to do with permissions. Permissions control what you have access to. Roles simply show what your screen looks like and help you make things more efficient. So let's start looking at permissions. Today in today's session, we're just going to kind of set the stage and talk about permissions and show you what they are so you have the knowledge needed to make the right decisions for your organization. So let's go ahead and start with the user card. So if I go to users and I look at my card, the admin card, we'll expand this out. Let's take a look at these tabs. So we have the general tab that tells information, the name about the user, the status, active or disabled, inactive. Now we move on to the second part where I can see the permission sets. So in the permission sets part, this is what gives me access. As you can see, I have the super access and the security permission set. These two let me do pretty much everything in the system. I'm the administrator. Now let's look at licenses. You can see here I have these two different licenses. Again, these grant me permission to do everything. Let's take a little bit deeper look at these permissions. Notice here this company field, and it's blank on my user card. What it means if it's blank is that I have access to all companies. So I have access to these two companies. I could restrict it down a little more like that and allow me to only have security access in that company. Now we're going to dig into the good stuff. Let's look at the permission sets. You can actually view the permission set from here just by pressing permissions, and it'll show you all the permissions that people get. But I'm going to go to the permissions list. If I go to the permission set list, what I first see is a big long list of system type permission sets. These are permission sets that come loaded in Business Central. So all of these permission sets are in here and can be used, and they all have semi-unique names, but you can kind of tell from what they are what they do. So like this one here, for example, the assembly view permission set. If I look at this, it's pretty straightforward. I can tell that it gives me access to the assembly header, line, setup, different things. Notice over here, there's different types of permissions that can be given. Read permission is the lightest one that gives you just permissions to read data on the page. Insert allows you to insert into the table. Modify lets you change things in the table. And delete allows you to delete. We'll talk about execute in a little bit. So this is a simple one. It says assemblies view. This gives you view into the assembly orders. If I go and I look at the assembly edit, this one gives me a little bit more. Notice here that I can read things and I can insert and I can modify. So this is what people need in order to modify assemblies. But keep in mind that that's all this permission set does. It does not give you any visibility into other areas of the system. So this type of permission set is meant to be used with other permission sets on the user card. So as we're going down here, we see other permission sets that are familiar sounding: banking, cash flow, cost accounting, things like that. Very typical things that people might need. So maybe the cost accountant needs these three permission sets, things like that. So you can figure out what some people need just from looking at these. But there's other ones that are a little more obscure sounding. This D365 BizFull Access That gives access to the full system. But let's take a look. Let's dig into it and see what it looks like. Like I just said, this gives you full access to the entire system. You can see across the top here, all these tables are pretty much full access. Now let's look even deeper. Down here on the bottom, what is this? This is including other permission sets. This is a concept called nesting. These are permission sets that are nested inside of this permission set, therefore granting you permissions to all of them as well. I like using this button here, View All Permissions, because this gives me a flat file of the permission sets that I can view more easily. This isn't the most confusing part of permissions. What I find is the most confusing part of permissions is trying to figure out which standard system permission sets to assign to people. Because as you can see here, some of these are easy to figure out and some of them are not. You can always go in and assign Biz Full Access or Biz Premium to your users, and they will get most things they need. In fact, they'll end up getting too many permissions. I'd like people to do a simple test. If you look and you go here and you go bank, this gives me access to the bank accounts. Right there. That comes from my permissions. I am allowed to view the bank accounts in this case. So that's typical that people have too much access from what I see out in the field. Sometimes people just have too much access. So where's this data coming from? These data are coming from, I'm going to go into the help here. I'm going to inspect pages and data. I'm going to move this notes so we can get a little bit more view. So I can tell from the bank accounts list page, this is coming from table number 270. Like we were just looking at the permission sets. I have a permission on my user card that is allowing me to access this table. So what's a page? A page is what you see on the screen right here, bank accounts. This window is a page. If I dig in a little deeper, this is also a page. This is the card page. Comes from the same data. I could even dig in further to other things. I could leave these help windows up, and I could go and do just sales orders. Same kind of thing. So looking at here, this is page 9305 from the sales header table. If I dig into a sales order, and I look, sales header table. That's what the sales order card page gets its data from. And on the sales order page, there is an embedded page here in the middle called a list page. This little list that comes up for your lines, your sales order lines. And we can see that this is called the sales order subform page, and it gets its data from the sales line table. So these are important concepts. It's important to look at this, and you'll see why as we get further. There's an interesting page here in Business Central that I want to look at. I'll go all the way back to the beginning just to start fresh. So if I go in and I search for a page called All Objects, I can see every object in the database. I'm going to go ahead and filter this. I'm going to sort it by object ID to give some context and clarity to what we're looking at. So while this continues to sort, let me tell you what you're looking at on the page here. All objects with captions is just what it sounds like. It is every single database object in the entire system. So what's an object? An object, in this case, what you're seeing on the screen here, is table data. This here is data, right? These are the records, these table data lines, and the table is what holds them. And we're going to look here a minute when this starts, and I'm going to show you how you can look at and see the different objects. And that is going to be an interesting concept. So now that the page has restarted, you can see here, I've sorted by object ID. That's just a number, just like you assign your sales order numbers or anything else. Each one of these objects gets a number. So like I said before, company a page. This is a page. This window we're looking at, all objects with captions, that's a page, and it gets these data from a specific table, the objects table. And I sorted by object ID just so you can get a feel and look into the different objects. So we have XML port is a type of object, page, code unit, table data, table, code unit, and so on and so on. This may or may not be helpful depending on how you determine to set up your permissions. It's important to know about and understand the concept. Let's go ahead and let's sort by just page. Now I can see all the pages in the system. So some of these are very, very familiar. The customer card, the GL account card, GL account list. What if I go sort by table? Same thing. But you might have a question here. You might say, why is table data here and table also? Let's look at just these. So while you're looking at this data on the screen, these records, right? These records that we're looking at, this is the table data. Records are table data. The table they're actually stored in is the table. That's why we have two different ones. So if I want somebody to have access to the payment terms, they need access to the table data and the table. Thankfully, all those standard Microsoft permission sets do offer everything you need. Just in some cases, they might offer you a little bit too much. Remember our example. So if you give people too many permissions, they're going to be able to get to things like this or things like this, which may be areas of Business Central that you want to secure from certain users and user groups. But likewise, you don't want them getting errors all over the place. So what to do? Let's go back and look at our permission sets again. So if I just look at permission sets, you'll notice here, these first ones that came up are user defined. That means me, as the user, created all of these permission sets. Simply like going like that. You can press new, make a test one, and go into it and add tables that you need. So I could go right in here, pick from a list of table data, start setting it up. Not so easy, obviously, because you have to know exactly all the tables you need to run Business Central. But you could do it. Keep it in mind. In our next session, we're going to talk about creating these user-defined permission sets and how to use them. So we have user-defined and we have system. And if you install add-in extensions into Business Central, they typically will give you their own extension permission sets that allow you to run the extensions, tables, and pages. So again, what to do? Do we pick these standard permission sets? Do we give users access to the full system, or do we lock it down from a perspective like a compliance requirement for our organization? That's what I want to talk about now. I want to talk about kind of just from a consulting perspective, where do you go with permission sets? So the first thing I ask clients to think about when they're thinking about securing their database is, how much security do you need? So I don't start with a question of how much security do you want, because that is a question that people usually say, lock everyone down. That's not the right answer. You should really be realistic with yourself and think about how much permissions do you actually need. So questions like compliance, we talked about compliance, audit requirements. Are you a publicly traded company? Are you an energy company? Things like that. How much permission do you really need? Very well likely that many customers have compliance requirements and audits that are around permissions. Maybe they have IT audits, maybe bank audits, could be anything. On the complete other side of the spectrum, there are businesses that are family-run businesses. Maybe they don't need any kind of permissions or requirements. There's certain types of organizations that run on a level of trust where, again, their users have full access to everything, and that is completely fine. If you don't mind if all of your employees can get into the bank account and the chart of accounts and different areas of the system, then case closed. You can assign your users one of these full access permission sets, either D365 Biz Full Access or D365 Biz Premium. And they will see most things other than security, and we'll talk about that in our next session. But with these two permission sets here, you can pretty much do most things in the system. And that's fine. If that's your organization and that's how you're set up, that's perfect. I also like to ask people, especially if they're new to Business Central and they've just implemented, think about what you've been doing in the previous years. Forever, if people have had access to everything forever and it's always been fine, think twice about going too far with permissions, because you might not really need all of the work that could go into setting up these permissions. But there's a second level. So first level is full access to everything in my mind. Second level is obscuring the system, and we call that security by obscurity. So you could imagine, and most people know, that there are permissions errors that come up if users don't have access to the things they need to do their job in Business Central. But in some cases, you might want to actually allow them to have full access, but just not see everything. That's where security by obscurity comes into play. So I like people to be able to go in and maybe they start with a custom permission set and they go in and they look at different, let's go back to the bank just to illustrate. So if I go to the bank accounts, and I go here, go back to our help, just for some context. And if I go in and inspect and look at this, I can see here that this is the bank account page. So with security by obscurity, you take out the pages that you don't want people to see. So I'd remove 371, 370. I would remove everything out that people don't need. Here at Stoneridge, we have a list of the financial facing pages and reports that people typically like to hide. So we can pretty easily build a custom permission set or teach you how to build a custom permission set and extract out the bank account card, the chart of accounts, the balance sheet, things like that. So users aren't getting into it and they get no permissions issues because they actually have access to this table data. They just don't have a way to consume it. So we're going to talk about that in the next session, but I'd like to end this with people going in and really thinking about their organization and what type of permissions they need in order to do their job and how to kind of organize it. So kind of like we left off with profiles in the last session. I said, take out a blank piece of paper, write down all your users' names, group them together, and decide on a list of profiles and what they should be for each one of the people, then pick the profiles. Same thing with security, guys. Think about what you really need. Be honest with yourself and your organization on how you're going to set up your security. Put it on paper. Start putting people in groups, thinking about what they need. And let's talk about how I briefly touched on that the profiles are not related to the permissions. The permissions are separate from the profiles. But when I set up an organization using profiles and permissions, I like to link them together, at least on paper. So I know these people in this profile, for example, banking. If I have a profile called bank administrator, that profile bank administrator on paper is related to different permission sets. And there are ways to do that in the system, but at least put it on paper and know what you're dealing with. In our next session, we're going to get into the heavy duty. We're going to start reviewing permission sets. I'm going to show how to do security by obscurity and remove visibility into things like the bank account and other areas you don't want people to have access to. And I'm actually going to also show you other examples of how to do even more advanced things with security. But for right now, please go through and think about your organizations and how you'd like to use permissions in Business Central. Thank you.